Welcome to the Home Hero Podcast. Today we are talking about having a conversation around, do you need a contract for every job that you're doing in your handyman business? Some jobs, big jobs, small jobs, all the jobs, none of the jobs. So do you need a contract? So we'll be talking about, what we think about that, some variables to consider for your business. I think that this is going to be one that depends on the owner, depends on how long they've been in business, their experience with clients, some how many experience they've had with nightmare clients. So I think there's a lot of variables here. But Coby, I'm excited to have this conversation because I know exactly where you stand firm on the contract side. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around contracts in the handyman space for work being completed.
Yeah, I think we feel maybe just a little bit differently about it. I think just short and sweet. I think you need an agreement, a signed agreement with your client 100% of the time before you, one, put somebody on the schedule, let alone work in their house. That's how I feel. Tons and tons and tons of reasons why. But the simplest reason, and I think probably the most important reason, when everybody hears contract, they think, okay, this is legal guidelines, this is legal protection. You think of lawyers when you think of a contract. I like to call it an agreement. It sounds less scary. Same thing, but it's a document that sets clear expectations for both yourself and your client. So having an agreement with a very clearly written scope of work, exactly what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, what happens if something goes wrong, what payment terms look like if everything goes right. It's just an opportunity, one more opportunity to very, very clearly establish for you and your client what the expectations of both parties are, and it can help avoid a lot of misunderstandings.
So let's clear up a logistical question I've got, which is we're talking a sign on the dotted line contract. What about a on your estimate, like that says, upon like accepting the estimate assumes you also acknowledge our service agreement that has all this stuff in there. Is that the same thing to you?
Yeah, as long as they have the document and they're acknowledging in some way, shape, or form, hey, I read this, I understand, and I agree. So in my estimating CRM software that I use JobTread in my business, and so for every single estimate, it just in the footer of the estimate, just right below the scope of work, that lines lays out exactly what we're doing and how much it costs. Directly below that, it walked through what our agreement was, and then they could digitally sign it. And frankly, I think I'm not an attorney, but I think the physical signature is probably a little bit less important than just having that in front of them where it's clearly accessible. They can read it, and then if they agree by saying, hey, when can you start? Or, we agree or would like to hire you. If you've got something that says they agreed to the document that you sent them, I think that's what's important. So I think it's less about the physical signature. I mean, if you're using a CRM and estimating software, most of them have a way for a client to approve, accept, digitally sign your estimate. If they don't, it might be taking a look at what other ones are out there, and they should have a spot for you to be able to put your agreement.
Okay, so we agree there. I thought that you were thinking like a pen and paper signature on everything, and I just don't think that's realistic for most handyman jobs. I would certainly be more like I would have a above certain dollar amounts, requiring maybe a little bit more on that expectation setting side. For example, we just got a new roof this year. And because it's a bigger ticket item, the sales process, like I had to sign a contract. But I definitely agree that every single job, whether it's a $300 to swap a ceiling fan or, bathroom remodel job, at a minimum in the estimate, having that verbiage of when you accept this estimate, you accept our terms around the work. So are you like cookie cutter versus custom? Like in your experience, did you just use a cookie cutter kind of contract? Did you have to customize it much? Because obviously, for smaller ticket handyman jobs, which that's the dream, most of our listeners are doing, multiple jobs in a day. The more custom it gets, the less profit you're making because it just takes time and energy into every single estimate, every single contract. So, what are your thoughts on kind of tweaks to your base contract?
Yeah. So I want to back up a little bit. Like you said, you think it kind of depends on the ticket price of the project. It makes total sense. If you're doing a $60,000 kitchen remodel, I don't think there's anybody that would say I don't want a contract for the $60,000 project. But what you have to think about, let's say you're hanging up a TV for somebody, and let's say it's a $200 project for you. How much is the homeowner's house worth? A lot more than $200. And in a absolute catastrophe, the worst case possible scenario, you're drilling into the wall and you miss the stud and you hit some wires and somebody's house burns down. So it's probably not the best example, but something catastrophic happens. Then what? Like how does that get handled? Like, is it the homeowner's insurance that's going to cover it? Is it your general liability insurance? Like you have to kind of you have to think about the liability when you're working on people's houses. Obviously, houses cost a lot of money when insurance gets involved, and you can get into a real nightmare situation. And having yourself and the homeowner both on the same page before you start the project, and it's laid out step by step of this is the course of action if the worst case scenario happens. It can give you and the homeowner, a lot of peace of mind. So I think that the dollar amount, the ticket price of the project, yes, it matters, but I still think you need a contract no matter what, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not just the ticket price of the project that's on the line. I mean, when you're dealing in somebody's house, there's just inherently a lot of
Mm-hmm.
liability there.
Okay, so anyone listening, like you should be using a CRM. It just makes everything more efficient. And in that, it makes pretty straightforward to have like a contract that's tied to your estimates that people agree to when they accept the estimate. I think that's the most efficient, productive way for people to deploy that. Now, one example, we actually just on our other podcast, the Handyman Success podcast, we interviewed the new owner of Honestly Handyman Services. And something that they had come across recently where they started tracking callbacks, being called back to a job to fix something or something didn't meet expectation, patch something up, whatever it was. So they're tracking callbacks. And in that tracking, they identified that, shoot, we keep getting called back for this specific part. It relates to, I'm blanking on what kind of part it is. It has to do with like plumbing. And depending on someone's, like how their plumbing is other factors outside the job, it was wearing down this part really fast. And it was creating these callbacks to enough degree where they noticed, right? And so what they did was for any job related to like these plumbing fixtures, faucets, toilets, I believe were the two main ones, they had a little appendage in their estimate contract that called out that needs to be mentioned to, it's mentioned in the contract, but also their technicians, their estimator now knows when it's that kind of job, they bring that up to the customer. Hey, like depending on this and that and the other, this could happen, but it's outside of our scope and it would require a different project to fix. So that was a really clear example of like they had a contract and they actually appended it because of something that was very reasonable to have covered in the contract that outside of the contract, the customer would not have understood that. And then zooming out, one little takeaway there that I don't want people to miss is that what you track improves. So tracking your callbacks, it's going to, it brought up this issue that related directly to expectations with the client and the contract. So that's something that they updated for both in person and or audibly talking about it because it was very common, as well as their base contract.
Yeah, yeah, and so that kind of brings me back to what you were asking about before. I never had, and I'm not saying I recommend this because I'm not an attorney, and every state's different. I never in my business had an attorney actually write our contract. That might have been a mistake. I'm not entirely sure. It worked well. Never had any very serious issues, thankfully. And I think in large part, I mean, we had issues, no legal issues, and I think partly because we had a very clearly written agreement, contract, whatever you want to call it. So my first contract came from when I got licensed as a residential builder in Michigan as part of the course curriculum that you have to go through to get licensed. They provide you with a sample
Mm.
contract, and it was more geared towards home builders. But I took that and I mean, frankly, I stuck it in ChatGPT and I was like, I need to make these changes to this. I want it to say these things, and it wasn't super like in legalese, super fancy, anything like that. But I just wanted it to be super clear, outlining what the expectations were. Like the simplest thing in there is like if an item is not explicitly listed in this scope of work that's attached, don't assume it's included.
Mm.
And I think that clears up a lot of things. And that's also why I say you want your scope of work to be as specific as possible. Like I wouldn't say, we're going to come, toilet swap. That wouldn't be verbiage I would put in the scope of work. I would get way more specific. We're going to come and we're going to remove and dispose of your existing toilet, repair the flange if it's damaged, or does not include, I would put an asterisk, but does not include replacement of flange if it's damaged. Like some of these things that you learn to expect. Like I
Yeah.
know this house has cast iron plumbing. I'm going to pull up this toilet. Flange might be rusted out, so I'm either going to just include it in my bid and I'm going to say I'm including it, or I'm going to put an asterisk and say if this comes up, because it very well might, it's not included. So getting super specific, but not going to an attorney. One of the benefits of not going to an attorney for your contract, which again maybe you should. I'm not an attorney, so don't take this as like legal advice. But as you're growing in your business and you're doing more projects and you're learning, you're going to learn about additional scenarios that you want to include in your contract. And if you have to go back to your attorney and have them add this every time, it gets pretty expensive. Would my agreement that I had stand up in court? I don't know. I would guess probably. But being able to add stuff kind of on the fly is helpful. Like one thing I added kind of on the fly, thankfully we didn't have an issue, but I've heard about people in again nightmare scenarios. They're going in, they're working in somebody's house when the homeowners are at work, but they've got their kids are at home. It's summertime and they're off school, and they've got minors in the house, and you've got your field tech or you're there, and you just really don't want to expose yourself to any sort of situation that could come from that. Any sort of
Mm.
he said, she said scenario. You can kind of fill in the blanks of what horrible things could happen. And so we added to our contract, we will not work in your house if there's minors present and there's not a legal guardian,
Hmm.
also
That's
present.
pretty. I think that's pretty smart boilerplate one.
Yeah, so there's and a lot of them were that way. Another example, this was given to me by the teacher in the builder's license course that I took. He used to be a home builder. And we never had this issue, but I was like, I might as well add this anyways, just in case. We're not responsible for the care or well-being of any pets that might be in the house. He gave the example. He was he was building the home and he had his excavator on site and he's digging the hole for the foundation, and the homeowner's elderly dog took a nap underneath the excavator and it did not go well. And so he added that in his contract. He gave another example. Somebody he knew, a homeowner had a pet monkey. And we're in Michigan, so that's pretty bizarre. I don't know if other states have like it's common to pet monkeys, but this homeowner had pet monkeys and they had a whole like spare room in their house that was this enclosure for the monkey. And they were replacing interior doors or something. Well, one of his employees left the door to this monkey enclosure, which is just a bedroom, open. Well, the monkey got out and it got outside and it got sick, and the homeowner ended up suing the contractor for thousands of dollars of vet bills for
Mm.
their pet monkey. So that was another one I just kind of added on the fly. We never had an issue with that, but
Yeah,
again, just making it clear.
I think things like that are good. And when I look at the boilerplate contract versus expectations, because I think it's good to focus firstly on setting clear expectations, not so much like I need a bulletproof contract that protects me. Are those things important? Yes. And that's where I think those scenarios are great to include in like, hey, if you accept this estimate, you're accepting our like terms of service, or that's not the right word for it, but you get what I mean. But by job, those things that you learn over time, I think that those are the most important, like kind of most applicable, I think, to people. Like it's definitely good to have those like boilerplate protections and expectations that are kind of the fine print, but to have transparent. But looking at like the example of like the toilet, you said replacing the flange that's not included. those are really great things where if you start paying attention to those things and beefing up your own processes, like it forces you to start processing your business more because we're in this estimate, there is a toilet swap. So we need to make sure we have, these asterisks of, hey, this includes, like you said, the removal, inspecting the flange. It does not include replacing it if it needs replacing. Those are great things to include like by item. So what other kind of main kind of variables would you recommend covering outside of the boilerplate, protections? I think a lot of those are pretty straightforward and anyone could find a lot of examples online for kind of a starting place. But what are some other notables as far as expectations that maybe you wouldn't initially think to put in there that are important to consider as far as a contract agreement goes?
Payment terms is the first one that comes to mind. And this is going to vary super widely by business and what your average ticket price and that sort of thing. Like if you're doing, larger remodels, chances are you're probably taking deposits for materials and things like that. And in the payment terms section in your agreement becomes far more important. But even if you're doing small projects, like listing out when is the homeowner going to give you the check? Is it right when you complete the project that day? Is it going to be net 15? Most of the time, a homeowner's going to expect when you come hang up their TV, they're going to write you a check and hand it to you while you're there in the house.
Mm-hmm.
But establishing that on the front end in an agreement that says, payment due upon completion, if you're doing a bigger project, having a draw schedule, so you're taking X amount up front for materials, and then as you get to this project milestone, like we hung the drywall, now we're going to take 10%, and now the drywall's finished. Now we get the rest of it, whatever that looks like. So having payment terms, I think, is super important. Again, and if you're doing handyman projects and these are lower ticket items, the chances are you're not going to have like progress draws on your TV mounting. Like when we show up, you give us 10%, and then we put the first anchor on the wall, and you give us another 10%. That obviously that's ridiculous. But just having something in there that says payment due upon completion of the project, I think is super important. Again, just not leaving room for any sort of he said she said situation. Not leaving room for that, and just it lends you a lot of credibility with the homeowner and trust. And I think they feel more comfortable when it's clearly outlined what you expect from them and what they should be expecting from you, knowing on the front end, like, hey, as soon as he's done, like, we're going to have to write him a check. So we better hang out and, be here to write him a check, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and I know one of the common things I see in the Facebook groups on this topic is, well, I'm not going to do a contract. I mostly work with repeat clients. They all know me, and they give me cookies, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I think, regardless of how professional anyone would portray themselves, or if your client base 100% repeats and you don't market, whatever that looks like, you need to have a CRM that you're managing the business in. You need to send an estimate for every single project, and it should just include the basic coverage that the homeowner understands. Like it's at least included and tied to every accepted job. Like there's a trail there. So that's just a common thing I see online as well. I work with like the same people over and over again, or the same property managers, but it doesn't just shirk off the responsibility to set clear expectations for each individual job, especially if there's those variables like the example you gave with the toilet.
Yeah. Yeah. And the quickest way to ruin a good relationship with a repeat client is mismatched expectations, and there's miscommunication, and things become unclear, and then somebody's got resentment towards the other person because they thought you're doing something you weren't, or they're asking you more than you thought you were doing. So just every time, and again, I don't see it as like this bulletproof contract, like you said, where if somebody sues you, you're going to court, and like that's why it's important. Well, that may be true. You're not thinking your best repeat clients that are baking you cookies every time you show up are going to sue you. It's all about expectation setting. And again, the liability aspect in a worst case scenario, if you have to file an insurance claim or they have to file an insurance claim, having an agreement that lays out what happens next and who's responsible for what, I think is super, super, super important. 100% of the time. 100% of the time. And if you aren't using a CRM that makes it simple, I think you should be, because even if it's a repeat client, like it doesn't take that much time. Even if you agree on the price and you're talking to them on the phone, like, oh yeah, it's $150 and I'll come put up your TV, whatever it looks like. And they're like, cool. I'll just send you the link to the estimate in a few minutes here if you can just approve that, and we'll get you on the schedule for whatever date.
Mm-hmm.
Making it easy for yourself and your client. I don't expect you to print out a contract and go out to their house, sit at the kitchen table, and have them sign on the dotted line. But getting their approval on your agreement with the scope of work all of the time, I feel very strongly that it's important.
Absolutely. And my kind of final encouragement is those individual jobs, like just keep a running list of those what ifs, those common problems that can sometimes happen. An example that we experienced personally was there was some siding that was a little rotted on our house, and it was supposed to be a half-day job for our handyman. And they ripped it out, and they found some serious dry rot in a very what do you call it? It's just a really important support beam above our garage, and so it ended up being like a 3 or 4 day job where they literally supported, like they brought plenty of materials to support like the actual garage door and the framing around it so that they could do all this, this dry rot repair. And it was one of those things where, when it comes to dry rot, like when we open it up, there might be more things, and we knew that because of that clear communication with our handyman. And also, we live in a very moist kind of dry rot's a big problem in our neck of the woods.
Yeah, and that really just highlights the importance of having a very, very clearly written scope of work. It's probably I'm gonna be backtracking myself a little bit, but it's probably a clear scope of work is probably more important than the terms or the agreement that's attached to it. Just very, very clearly explaining what you're going to do and what you're not going to do is hugely important. And communicating this stuff verbally when you're having a conversation with the homeowner ahead of time is just as, if not more important than that as well. So like your handyman, like, hey, when I open this thing up, we might find, just knowing the area, and I've been doing this a long time, there might be some rot here that we have to replace, and it would be additional if that were the case, but I'll keep you posted. Mm-hmm. So setting expectations is hugely important, and I think the agreement and a clear scope of work is one of the best ways to make sure you do that every single time.
Awesome. I know, learning from experience. Any final thoughts on, or tips, encouragements on having a contract in place for handyman work?
Don't overthink it. Again, just focus on setting expectations. I don't think you need to run out and hire an attorney to get this, bulletproof contract written right away. You might choose to, but having something that outlines expectations is better than having nothing. So just go into ChatGPT or look up examples of handyman contracts or home service contracts, and just have something. And if you don't have a spot to put it in your CRM, my opinion, look for a new CRM.
Awesome. Good thoughts. If you guys have any questions, drop us a comment. Also, we have a new Facebook group called the Home Hero Business Owner Community. Join us on Facebook. Me and Coby are in there. We're going to be getting our guests, and hopefully anyone that wants to join and has any questions, have conversations around all these topics. We're also real people that care to answer your questions and help however we can. So if you join us there, the Home Hero Business Owner Community on Facebook, me and Coby are in there, happy to connect, answer any questions, or field any topic ideas that we can chat about on the podcast here.